Party, as the banners behind me make abundantly clear. We're a nonprofit group that does not endorse candidates and which stands for the following three principles: free markets, fiscal responsibility, and constitutionally limited government. We don't get involved in things beyond really the scope of those things. We have 3 chapters that cover the 3 chunks of Palm Beach County. In the north, of course, we have the Jupiter chapter, where our speaker spoke last night. We have the Wellington chapter, and we have this, of course, being the Boca chapter, just in case, just making sure you know where you are. As the clock ticks down till November, we now have 245 days as of today until the election, where America will redefine itself. It's going to either continue on a path of slow motion suicide by financial and moral implosion through entitlements, or it's going to move in a direction to correct itself back to the republic our founding fathers originally intended, emphasizing the freedom to enjoy the fruits of our own labor through individual liberty and American exceptionalism. So the time to get involved is now.
Good evening. My name is Terry Brady. Everybody is probably tired of hearing me. I've been here at many meetings. I want to tell you a little bit about me. I come to this country 54 years ago. I was a union delegate for 30 years, and after I seen what was happening to our country, I switched, and guess what side I went with? I went with you guys.
Anybody understands what's happening at General Motors? You hear our president, whatever his name is, talking about the health and wealth of the auto industry. I read this last night to our chapter in Jupiter. General Motors says it will halt production of the Volt car.
Hello folks, my name is Joe Mady. I live in Wellington. Been there for about 13-14 years and belong to that particular chapter. My mission today is to go ahead and deliver a program about poll watching. Does anybody have any idea what poll watching is? I'll answer the question. Poll watching basically is fighting fraud on the left hand and following procedures on the right hand. Put that thought aside. In the state of Florida, we have 67 counties. If we had one of us in every single county, we would shut down this state so fast in fraud, it would be great. And you know how much we'd spend in hard dollars? Zero.
Story that's worth retelling. It's about a band of wild hogs which lived along a river in a secluded area of Georgia at the turn of the last century. These hogs were stubborn, ornery, and independent bunch. They had damaged and injured property and killed humans. They had survived floods, fires, freezes, droughts, hunters, dogs, and everything else. No one thought they could ever be captured. And one day a trapper came down from North Dakota into town, not far from where the hogs lived, and walked into the general store. He asked the storekeeper, "Where can I find the hogs? I want to capture them." The storekeeper and about 8 people there at the store laughed out loud at such a claim, but pointed him in the general direction. The stranger left with his 1-horse wagon, an axe, and bought a few sacks of corn. 2 months later, everyone assumed he died. He came back, went back to the store, and asked for help to bring the hogs out. He said he had them all penned up in the woods, something that since the Revolution they hadn't been able to do up until 1900. People were amazed and came from miles around to hear him tell the story of how he did it. "The first thing I did," the stranger said, "was to clear a small area in the woods with my axe. Then I put some corn in the center of the clearing. At first, none of the hogs would take the corn. Then after a few days, some of the young ones would come out, snatch some corn, then scamper back into the underbrush. Then the older ones began taking the corn, probably figuring that if they didn't get it, some of the other ones would. Soon, they were all eating the corn. They stopped grubbing for acorns and roots and foraging on their own. About that time, I started building a fence around the clearing, a little higher each day. At the right moment, I built a trap door and sprung it. Naturally, they squealed and hollered when they knew what I'd done to them. But I can pen any animal on the face of the earth if I can first get him to depend on me for a free handout.
Well said.
America is under socialism. And socialism is nothing but phase one of communism. And this is the 11th hour. The clock is about to strike midnight. And I'm not taking any prisoners, and neither should you.
No prisoners, good.
I come to this candidacy for the U.S. Senate having lived under communism. I was born and raised in Cuba, tragically, under Fidel Castro's communist regime. I know full well what communism is. My father was a political prisoner. One of my uncles was one of the longest held political prisoners in the Western Hemisphere. Members of my family were tortured, imprisoned, and executed. I know what it's like to live day to day under a communist regime. Under a communist regime that kills the human spirit. And it kills the human spirit unless you have faith in God. And I was very fortunate to come from a family that had a deep faith in God, that got us through each day, in spite of the hunger, in spite of the persecution, and in spite of the suffering. If I were to describe to you what a typical day under communism is, you would not be able to accept that such suffering can be brought to a people. And I want to give you an example of how communism can change the way that you see life and the way that you see even the most simple things. Because I come to this race for the United States Senate with a very clear conviction that my job on the floor of the U.S. Senate is to fight against socialism, which is communism. And socialism is destroying this nation. The other day, I asked my daughter, what do you see? What do you think of when you see a field of sunflowers? And she said, I think about life. I think about photosynthesis. I think about beauty. And I asked her because sunflowers are my favorite flowers. But when I see a field of sunflowers, I see something different. I remember a lady in my town who kept to herself. And she had built this garden that she made a very beautiful fence around with sunflowers. She wouldn't allow anyone in that garden to walk around the sunflowers except for me. And she always would give me some of her sunflowers when I would come to see her. She was very, very guarded about anyone entering that garden. Shortly before we left Cuba, she called me and she said, come here. I want to give you some sunflowers for the last time. And she said to me, underneath these sunflowers are the bodies of my 2 dead sons that I pulled out of a common grave, much against the will of the local Communist Party, because they died fighting against the communists. So when I see a field of sunflowers, I see death. And that is what communism does to your spirit. And it takes a lot to rise from that. And you will only do it with courage. And you, ladies and gentlemen, have socialism in this country. And you're going to have the courage to fight it. Because one day, your children or your grandchildren will look at a field of sunflowers and they won't see life. They won't see beauty, they will see death the way that I saw it. The clock is about to strike midnight, and our country, our beloved America, has been sold down the path of socialism. It is going to take each and every one of you to change it. When I'm finished tonight, and I tell you what is happening to this country, you will go home and you will say, I'm heartbroken. And when you're finished thinking about the heartbreak, I want you to get up and I want you to do what Americans do best, which is to fight. And join me. Because this is why I'm running for the United States Senate. I have never held public office before. I am a citizen politician. I have never ran for office before. I have stepped forward to serve America and to give back to America for what America gave to me, which is my freedom and my life. I don't need another career. I've had a successful career as a linguist. This is the least that I can do for America. But in order to understand what is happening to America, you have to have a world view of this incredible nation. And as I see young people, young Americans apologizing for America, I feel deep sadness because Americans have nothing to apologize for. It was the American spirit of revolution and freedom that ignited that same spirit in other nations and inspired them to also become free. Entire nations were inspired by the spirit of the American Revolution for freedom. Americans must lead because Americans have shown the world that they can lead. And they have a document which is second only to the Bible, and that is the U.S. Constitution. That we must defend. And the U.S. Constitution is under attack every single day of our lives in America. So as you look at America with a worldview, and I have that worldview of America, it is very important for me, and I believe that it is critical to have a worldview of America if you're going to stand on the floor of the U.S. Senate and deal with legislation that is critical, not just for this country, but for the future of the world. You look at what is happening in China. I published a series titled The Beijing Affair. It's now into its second part. I will be coming up with part 3 as soon as time allows. And in The Beijing Affair, I talk about how American companies have given away, have shared our innovation, our technology with the communist Chinese. And the communist Chinese in Beijing have taken that technology and have turned it into military power, both horizontal and vertically, into space. Because as we sit here, Beijing and its communist thugs have created electromagnetic pulse weapons at the ready to be pointed at our aircraft, should we ever become involved in any conflict with Taiwan or anywhere in the Asian theater. And yet, we see Geithner and President Obama visiting Hu Jintao, bowing to him as our creditor. How tragic to see the leader of the greatest nation on earth bowing to a communist murderer. That has to end. You must demand that it end, and one of the ways that you can end that is by stopping the spending and the debt that is out of control. And that's why a balanced budget amendment is critical and urgent, because we must stop the spending. We have to shrink Washington's head into a smaller one. The reason that this nation has become a socialist nation is because you have a government that is out of control. and the power has to be given back to the states. There is nothing compatible between our Judeo-Christian principles and the Islamic extremism and how they treat apostasy. They treat apostasy with death. And this is something that leads to a critical issue. When you look at these totalitarian ideas, Islamic extremism, Sharia law entering our nation, because President Obama and his cabinet is sitting and talking with Islamic representatives in America, assuring them that we will not commit blasphemy against Sharia law. That is against our First Amendment rights. Amen. And this is happening as we speak. So I say that our Second Amendment is sacred. And we must defend our Second Amendment passionately. Because at the core of the Second Amendment is the fact that a civilized society can be influenced by ideology. But a civilized society must never be forced into an ideology. And when they come to you, forcing you into an ideology, socialism, Islamic thinking, you better be holding one in each hand. This is why I'm deeply concerned about the NDAA, the National Defense Act. And I know that there are other candidates out there that when they're asked, they start squirming. I'm not afraid. And I'll tell you why I'm against the NDAA. Remember what Ben Franklin said, and very wisely. But when you give up freedom for national security, you basically end up with neither. When I was in Cuba, I would go into Havana. I was studying to be a concert pianist. And I would say sometimes, I want to enter that building. I want to see this building. These were buildings built by the Spaniards who immigrated to the island. Beautiful architecture. I wanted to see them inside. This was part of my heritage. There would be a guard in the front saying, no, you cannot enter this building. Why? For national security. Because you know, the imperialists, those American imperialists, they want to attack our island. So you cannot enter here, and you cannot enter there. And anything you said was disruptive in Cuba. When I read the NDAA, I do not like it. Because the NDAA in the hands of a socialist like President Obama is a dangerous weapon. A very dangerous weapon. And don't forget that Barack Hussein Obama has a Marxist background. He has a Marxist background. When Fidel Castro took over, he was a Marxist. In fact, I am very proud to come from a line of freedom fighters. My father and my two uncles were actually chasing Castro and his rebels in the 1950s, well before Castro took over Cuba, because my father and my uncles knew full well that he was a Marxist. And I'm here to tell you that Barack Hussein Obama is a Marxist.
That's right.
Yes. And the Cuban Revolution, don't let anyone mislead you. The Cuban Revolution was not an economic revolution. It was an ideological revolution.